9 Beretta pistols made this list. Only 3 are fully legal without restriction. The other 6 have been banned, reclassified, or specifically targeted by governments worldwide. This is the documented history of how that happened. This breakdown covers 9 Beretta designs that left measurable marks on military history, law enforcement policy, and firearms regulation worldwide. Let us get into it. Number 9. Beretta Model, 1915. When the First World War created an urgent demand for compact sidearms that could function in the close quarters of trench warfare, Beretta responded with the Model 1915. It was the company's first serious semi-automatic pistol design, and it established a manufacturing philosophy that would define the brand for the next 100 years. The Model 1915 was chambered in 7.65mm Browning and later in 9mm Glicenti, a cartridge developed specifically for Italian military use. The Italian army issued it widely to officers and specialized units. Its open slide design, which would become a recognizable Beretta trademark, was first introduced here as a practical engineering solution to reduce weight and improve cooling during sustained use. What made this pistol historically significant was not just its design, but its timing. It entered service during a period when semi-automatic pistols were still competing with revolvers for military acceptance. The Model 1915 helped settle that debate in Italy and influenced how European militaries evaluated handgun design in the decades that followed. Caliber 7.65mm Browning, capacity 7+1, barrel length 3.3 inches, weight 20 ounces, price range $400 to $800 as a collector piece. The verdict, the Model 1915, today sits in antique classifications in most jurisdictions. It is one of the 3 on this list that faces no meaningful modern restriction. The next pistol served across 3 continents, and its post-war surplus circulation became one of the most documented cases of military arms redistribution in the 20th century. Number 8. Beretta Model 1934. The Model 1934 is one of the most widely produced Italian military pistols in history, and its record of service spans conflicts across 3 continents. Adopted as the standard sidearm of the Italian armed forces in 1934, it remained in official military service in various capacities for several decades after World War II ended. Chambered in 9mm Cordo, also known as 380 ACP, the Model 1934 was valued for its reliability in diverse environmental conditions. Italian forces carried it through the North African desert, the mountainous terrain of the Balkans, and the harsh winters of the Eastern Front. Its simple design meant it could be maintained with minimal tools, a practical necessity in field conditions. The controversy surrounding this pistol is not about its design, but about its history. It was the standard sidearm of a military that fought under a fascist government, and large numbers of these pistols were captured, redistributed, and used by multiple factions across Europe during and after the war. Post-war surplus models circulated widely across several continents for decades. Caliber 9mm Corto, capacity 7+1, barrel length 3.7 inches, weight 23 ounces, price range $300 to $600 depending on condition. The verdict, the Model 1934 is the second of the 3 on this list that remains broadly legal today. Its single-stack magazine and historical classification keep it outside the restrictions that affect more modern designs. The next entry is where the list shifts into genuinely restricted territory. Number 7. Beretta 93R. The 93R occupies a specific and well-documented place in the history of law enforcement response to organized crime in Europe during the 1970s and 1980s. It was developed in response to a specific threat environment, and its design reflects those origins directly. The 93R is a selective-fire pistol capable of firing 3-round bursts. It was produced in limited numbers and issued exclusively to specialized Italian law enforcement and military units tasked with counter-terrorism operations during a period of significant political violence in Italy. The folding front grip and extended magazine were functional adaptations for controlled burst fire at close range. Selective fire capability is what places the 93R in the most restricted category in virtually every jurisdiction worldwide. In the United States, it falls under the National Firearms Act. In most European nations, civilian ownership is either completely prohibited or requires licensing that is almost never granted. Caliber 9mm. Capacity 15+1 or 20 round extended magazine. Barrel length 6.1 inches. Weight 40 ounces with accessories. Price range. Transferable examples in the United States have sold for between $15,000 and $25,000 at auction. The verdict. The 93R was never intended for civilian markets, and its global restricted status has never changed. The next pistol faced a completely different kind of regulatory journey, driven not by its fire mode, but by a 10-year legislative experiment in the United States. Number 6. Beretta Model 92. The Model 92 is one of the most recognizable pistol designs in modern history, and its regulatory journey is more complicated than its mainstream familiarity suggests. Introduced in 1975, the Model 92 was designed as a high-capacity service pistol at a time when 15-round magazines represented a significant advancement over standard military sidearms. Its double-action, single-action trigger, open slide design, and aluminum alloy frame performed consistently across military trials in multiple countries. When the United States Army selected a variant of it, designated the M9 as the standard service pistol in 1985, it became one of the most widely recognized handgun designs in the world. That recognition made it a specific target during the 1994 federal assault weapons ban, which restricted its standard capacity magazines for civilian purchase during its 10-year active period. Although the federal ban expired in 2004, California, New York, and several other states maintained their own magazine restrictions. The full capacity configuration of the Model 92 remains legally complicated for civilian ownership in multiple American states to this day. Caliber 9mm. Capacity 15+1. Barrel length 4.9 inches. Weight 33.6 ounces. Price range $600 to $800. The verdict. Outside the United States, the Model 92 faces varying civilian ownership restrictions depending on national law. Its capacity is the consistent regulatory trigger across every jurisdiction that has addressed it. The next entry shows how sharing components between platforms created legal complications nobody had written rules for. Number 5. Beretta CX4 Storm. The CX4 Storm was designed to share magazines and components with Beretta's pistol lineup, specifically the 92 series and the CX4 Storm. This interoperability was a practical feature for law enforcement agencies wanting logistical consistency across their equipment. That same interoperability became the source of its regulatory problems. In Canada and Australia, the CX4 Storm was reclassified after initial approval, specifically because it could accept higher capacity magazines designed for pistol platforms. In Canada, it moved into restricted categories that significantly limited where and how it could be used legally. These reclassification events became referenced in policy discussions as examples of how existing firearms regulations struggle to keep pace with modular and interoperable designs. The CX4 Storm had cleared initial regulatory review and was later moved without any change to the firearm itself. Caliber 9mm. Capacity 15+1. Barrel length 16.6 inches. Weight 5.7 pounds. Price range $900 to $1,100. The verdict. The CX4 Storm remains available in several markets, but its reclassification history illustrates how the same firearm can shift legal categories without any modification to its design. The next entry shows how compact dimensions combined with standard capacity created a specific regulatory profile. Number 4. Beretta PX4 Storm. The PX4 Storm introduced a rotating barrel mechanism to Beretta's polymer frame lineup. This engineering approach distributes recoil differently than traditional tilting barrel systems, and attracted genuine interest from law enforcement evaluators in the mid-2000s. Several agencies adopted it, and it went through military trials in multiple countries. Its modular grip system addressed a growing recognition that standardized dimensions did not work equally well for all users, a practical consideration that influenced procurement decisions. The regulatory complications centered on the compact variant. Its combination of reduced dimensions and standard capacity magazines placed it in a category that multiple jurisdictions were specifically targeting through updated legislation on concealable high-capacity pistols. Caliber 9mm, capacity 17+1, barrel length 4.0 inches, weight 27.7 ounces, price range $550 to $750. The verdict: the PX4 Storm is legal in most jurisdictions, but its full capacity configuration is unavailable in regions with magazine restrictions. The next pistol has one of the most geographically complicated Cold War distribution histories of any Italian military sidearm. Number 3. Beretta model. 1951. The model 1951 was Beretta's first pistol chambered in standard 9mm parabellum, aligning the company with the NATO standard cartridge when it was adopted by the Italian military in 1957. It was also adopted by Egypt, Israel, Iraq, and Nigeria, making its Cold War distribution one of the most geographically complex of any Italian pistol. The Israeli adoption is particularly well documented. The model 1951 was used by Israeli defense forces during several significant operations in the 1960s and 1970s. The fact that the same design was simultaneously in service with governments holding opposing positions in regional conflicts reflects the arms trade dynamics of that period, where export decisions had consequences that extended far beyond the original transaction. The regulatory legacy of the Model 1951 is primarily tied to export control policy rather than civilian restrictions. Its distribution history was specifically referenced in international discussions about manufacturer accountability and export licensing standards as those frameworks developed through the latter half of the 20th century. Caliber 9mm, capacity 8+1, barrel length 4.5 inches, weight 31 ounces, price range $350 to $700, depending on origin markings and condition. The Model 1951 is the third broadly legal design on this list. Its single-stack magazine keeps it outside the capacity restrictions, affecting higher capacity modern designs. The next entry created classification problems that governments are still working through today. Number 2. Beretta APX. The APX was developed as Beretta's entry into the United States Army's Modular Handgun System competition, which ultimately selected the Sig Sauer P320. Despite not winning that contract, the APX was adopted by Italian law enforcement and evaluated by several other agencies internationally. Its serialized chassis system, where the legally registered component is a removable module rather than the frame, created classification questions across multiple jurisdictions. In countries where the legal definition of a firearm is specifically tied to the frame or receiver, the chassis approach does not fit existing language cleanly. Several European governments issued specific guidance on how to classify the AP under their existing laws with varying conclusions. Some required registration of the chassis, others the grip module. That inconsistency across neighboring jurisdictions with similar legal traditions reflects how the modular design outpaced the regulatory frameworks meant to address it. Caliber 9mm, capacity 17+1, barrel length 4.25 inches, weight 27.5 ounces, price range $400 to $600. The verdict: the APX is legally available where standard capacity semi-automatic pistols are permitted. Its classification ambiguity remains unresolved in several jurisdictions. The final entry is the most documented example of how a firearm can face progressive restriction through administrative decisions rather than legislation. Number 1. Beretta 92 FS INOX. The 92FS INOX is a stainless steel variant of the standard 92FS, and its regulatory history represents one of the clearest documented cases of how administrative processes, rather than legislative bans, can progressively restrict a previously legal firearm. Commercially available through the 1990s and early 2000s, the 92FS INOX was adopted by law enforcement agencies in coastal and high-humidity environments, where stainless construction offered a practical maintenance advantage over standard blued finishes. The California handgun roster system became the mechanism through which this variant was effectively removed from the new handgun market in that state. California requires dealer-sold handguns to pass testing and maintain roster listing. As requirements were updated, manufacturers declined to resubmit variants for retesting, and the 92FS INOX was delisted. By the early 2010s, it could no longer be sold new through California dealers, while the standard blued 92FS remained listed. The result was a documented legal situation where two functionally near-identical pistols had different purchase statuses in the same state based entirely on finish and listing status, rather than any functional distinction. This outcome has been cited in ongoing legal challenges to the roster system as evidence that administrative classification does not consistently track with functional differences between firearms. Caliber 9mm, capacity 15+1, barrel length 4.9 inches, weight 34.4 ounces, price range $750 to $950. The verdict. Outside California, the 92FS INOX remains legal in most United States jurisdictions subject to standard magazine laws. Internationally, it follows the same frameworks applied to the standard 92FS in each country. What this list documents is how firearm design, historical context, and regulatory response intersect across time and geography. A pistol from 1915 sits in antique classifications. A selective-fire design from the 1980s is effectively inaccessible to civilian markets at any price. A modern chassis pistol exists in legal ambiguity across multiple jurisdictions simultaneously, and a stainless steel finish determined legal purchase availability in ways entirely disconnected from function. 3 of the 9 designs on this list face no meaningful civilian ownership restrictions in most countries. The other 6 have been restricted, reclassified, or specifically targeted through legislation or administrative processes in at least one major jurisdiction. That ratio reflects how regulatory systems respond to design characteristics, historical associations, and political contexts, rather than applying consistent functional criteria across all cases. Which of these 9 designs surprised you most, either in terms of its history or where it ended up legally? Put that in the comments. These are the conversations that go beyond what a firearm looks like and into what it actually represents in historical and legal terms. If this kind of documented analytical breakdown is what you are looking for, subscribing keeps this content in your feed.